Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jacqui, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients. Hello and welcome to episode 8, which is all about how to make your CV stand out. This is an episode that we hope will be really practical and helpful for those of you that are in the job search phase of your career, looking to get noticed, looking to get yourselves an interview and get a new role. Before we dig into the topic, just to share a little bit more about what we do and why we're qualified to give you this advice. So Pam, you introduce yourself as a job search coach and expert CV writer. What does that mean?
So day to day, I am literally spending hours working with people on their job search, making sure that the CV is right, that the CV has got the right information, that the CV tells a story, and that all of their key skills and experience are highlighted to make it really easy for the reader to think, yes, I need to get that person in for an interview. And then obviously once you get the interview, you've got more chance of getting that job offer. So so my days are pretty much spent in job search mode for all of my clients and writing CVs, which I absolutely love doing.
And from my side, one of the things that I do alongside the leadership coaching work and development work that I do, I also consult with clients, particularly around their people strategy. So selecting great talent is something that I've consulted with clients on, and I have done a lot of recruitment. So I have been on the receiving end of a lot of CVs and been the person who is wanting to really search out and find that amazing next talent for a client company. And this has been the bane of my life at times when you see CVs that don't stand out or CVs that you just feel don't really tell a story, don't really bring that person to life. That's been a real frustration that I've been on the receiving end of. So between the two of us, hopefully we can give you some real practical, actionable advice. So Pam, to start us off then, when people come to you to work on their CV, what is the most common mistake? What's the most common thing that you have to rectify?
So the most common thing, in fact, like every single CV, so most CVs that come into me will be full of buzzwords because people have made an attempt to tailor them. So they'll be full of all of these great words, but they just really lack the depth, they lack the story. And people think that putting on all of the keywords will give them a better chance of getting through things like the applicant tracking systems, which most people will know as the ATS. People really fear the ATS, so they will just pile in all of these keywords and think, well, as long as I've got all of the keywords on there, that'll be enough, that'll get me an interview. But what you forget is on the other side of that applicant tracking system is the human that's going to read it, that's got to connect with your story. You know, your CV is your career story. That reader has got to connect with that. If they don't connect with it, or you leave them in doubt in any way, then you're not going to get selected for that interview.
And I think first of all, it's useful to probably, for those that aren't familiar with what an applicant tracking system is, this is particularly used in bigger companies, not always used in smaller companies who do less volume of recruitment. But for the majority of roles that people apply for, an applicant tracking system is a piece of software that will electronically scan the CV that you're submitting and will generally be programmed to identify, which is why people feel that having those buzzwords, and you're so right, Pam, it does become a case of buzzword bingo sometimes when people have tried to game the system and tried to have a CV that will get past the system, because people are worried that if they leave words out, that the system won't put their effectively it does the pre-screening, it does the sifting kind of stage, so that whoever then is looking at CVs has fewer CVs that they have to look at. And it is so obvious from my perspective, being on the receiving end of, you know, either when people have kind of come through in an applicant tracking system, or when they've written a CV assuming that they will. It is so obvious when it is just piped full of words, and they're not even in sentences. It's just, you know, strategic and leader and all of those just generic words that people feel that they need to show that they've got, you know, project management, you know, naming every system that they've ever worked on. People just fill them full. And it's so boring to look at. It doesn't make any sense to read. So how do you kind of transform that then? If somebody's in that situation and they're kind of like, oh yeah, maybe that is a bit of me, maybe that's what I've been doing. What does someone need to do to make that make sense?
Okay, so I think the first thing to do, and this is the first thing that I'll say to my clients as well, is when you read it back, does it make sense to you? If you think about it from the reader's point of view, if you're reading that, does that clearly describe you? Does that show what you deliver, what you've delivered in the past, what you can bring to the table? Does it clearly demonstrate that? Now, if you read your CV back, 9 times out of 10, you'll think, oh no, it doesn't actually. So what you've then got to do, the best way to do it is to break it down. Okay, so go back to every single job, and I call this creating a career map as well. So go through every single job, and what you want to do is you want to think about, what did I actually do in this job? And not necessarily those day-to-day tasks. Like, what did I deliver? How did it impact the company? If you are working in sales, for example, you could be, if you're thinking about a sales manager position, so sales manager is responsible for, you know, hitting sales targets, for bringing in more money into the business, but actually what sits under that. So you were only successful and hit your targets because you were able to build relationships, you were able to nurture those relationships, you were able to develop new business, you were able to clearly articulate the products that you were selling. So there's a lot more to achieving sales targets when you start looking underneath what's going on in that role. So if you start thinking, okay, well, what was my purpose in that role? So who was I reporting into? What was I doing on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis? What impact did I really make? Now, when you start writing your CV from that point of view, what you'll find is you will then bring out all of this amazing stuff, and you'll look at your original CV and think, wow, that's just like a load of bullet points. And obviously you do need to have an element of tasks that you are completing, but you also need to show what you delivered in each role as well, because if you just show what you deliver but not what you're doing day to day, then your experience might be in question. So it needs to be a nice mix of what you've delivered in that role and what you were doing on a daily, weekly basis. And once you kind of get that mix right, then it will read clearly, you know, this is what I delivered and this is what I do. And things that I always take off CVs are things like the admin duties or admin duties as required and things like that, like remove them straight away. So I just go through a whole CV and I'll just be like, out, like take those bits out. You don't anything where you're saying as and when required or admin duties or things like that, you just take them out because they're just a waste of space. You just want the stuff where you're adding value. So if you're a leader, that would be maybe around the appraisals that you do with your team, maybe it's the daily huddles with your team, you know, things like that, things that allow someone to see what you can bring to them as well.
I think one tip I would give with this situation is to bear in mind that the person that is first receiving that CV and reading it often is not a functional specialist in the area that you're applying to work. So if you are applying for that sales manager role, the person who is doing the initial sift is likely to be in the HR or recruitment team, and they will then be providing CVs to the hiring manager. So make your CV appeal to people who don't necessarily know all of the technical ins and outs. It still needs to make sense to them. I've taken so many briefs from hiring managers, and the questions that I ask hiring managers to think about are things like, what kind of person do you need? Beyond, yes, for a sales manager role, you need someone who can hit sales targets. What are the characteristics or qualities that separate the best from the rest within your team? What is it you want more of? What kind of character, what kind of personality? And get them to really think about, who do they need to bring into their team? Because the personal skills are just the very basics. That's the bread and butter. Yes, you need that. But also what you want is to really show that person that's reading your CV something of you as a person. And I think that's one of the things I would say, is that people often go very much towards the technical elements of their roles. And when you're applying for jobs at a head of or a director level or a senior manager level, you really need to show what you can bring as a person and how you can operate as part of a management or leadership team above and beyond the technical aspects of what you can do with the job. So bear in mind that the person first reading that CV probably isn't a functional specialist, and a lot of what they're going to be doing and making those decisions as to who do I put in front of this hiring manager is going to be based on a lot of those aspects.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also goes for recruiter jobs that you apply for as well, because if you're applying for a recruiter job, usually what happens there is your CV will not be viewed by the recruiter until later on when they do a search of the database. So your CV will be taken out of an email queue and will be added to the system, usually by an administrator within that office, who will then have a quick scan of your CV, depending on how clear you've been as to which job you're applying for and all the rest of it. They will then put tags against your profile on their database. And then the recruiter will be like, right, okay, how many applications have we had? I'll do a search. And then depending on how you've been tagged is then whether you'll come back up in that search. So that's another thing, another reason why CVs will get lost. You know, when you apply for 2 recruiter ads and you never hear back, probably your CV is lost within their system because you've not articulated your experience well enough for somebody who's got no understanding of what you do to be able to read through and go, oh, okay, so this person is a marketing manager and this person specializes in SEO or PPC, and then they can add the relevant tags onto your profile. So you should always go with that assumption that that first person doesn't have a clue what you do. And that's almost your goal, isn't it? To make your CV stand out, you need to really kind of, you know, give it to them in the simplest terms, but really show what you deliver and allow them to really understand it easily. So if you read your CV back and you think, or you should be able to give your CV to, like, I don't know, 15-year-old child and say, what do I do? What do I do? You read that and tell me what I do. And if they just hand it back and go, I have got no idea, you know, you need to get back to the drawing board and, you know.
And what would you say on length of CVs? Because fierce debates that happen about how long a CV should be. What camp are you in on this?
So this is why I see this so often, and people get so wound up with this. And I see loads of different CV writers, you know, you've got to just have 2 pages because it's the industry standard. Like, somebody made up this rule, nobody knows who it was. So, okay, your CV, you don't want reams and reams of pages. And realistically, they're going to make a decision off page 1, but you do need to have an extra page or 2, depending on what level you're at. Now, if you were middle management level, I would expect that you could fit everything onto 2 pages. If you were moving into head of, director roles, C-level roles, then you might want to move on to 3 pages. Anything else just isn't going to be read. So it's not really about the fact you can't have those extra pages. It's just like, who is going to be bothered to read through all of that information? And you should only be putting the stuff that's relevant and making sure that it's concise and, you know, all of that good stuff. So yeah, 2 to 3 pages, but there are occasions like education CVs, sometimes we'll have a list of publications. Project managers might have a list of specific projects. You can have an additional page with additional information that you can guide people to. If you'd like to see what work I've published, then page 4 is where you need to go. Same with, project management. Every CV is unique, but you want your core information on page 1 and 2, and anything else you expect will not be read. But if you're going to include them, you need to still, follow the same process and make sure you're still giving them value within that.
Yeah, I love that advice. And again, it comes back to making it easy for the person on the receiving end. So when I've recruited, for example, senior project manager roles, you do want the detail. You want to know what value of project did this person do? You want to know, did they do end-to-end project management, or did they do elements of project management? You want to know what type of projects is it, what industry, have they done lots of different industries, or has it been purely within one? So there is quite a lot of detail. And similar, I've done roles within engineering, and there's a whole list as long as your arm of technical qualifications that you want people to have, and therefore you do need to see those listed. But the mistake is when people try and jam that into the CV as they're going through, or put it on page 1, when actually that's relevant when you've already got an interest in that CV. When you feel like this could be a great candidate, then you want to be able to reassure yourself, yes, I'm not going to look an idiot when I put this in front of a hiring manager. You don't want to look an idiot. You want to make sure that you've got good candidates and you're handing them over. So you do need that detail, but you don't need it stuffed throughout or on page 1. It works so much better. And my personal record when I was recruiting was I once had a 36-page CV.
Oh my goodness. But do you know that they probably sent you their base CV? Because I would say create a version that's your base CV that's got everything in. So maybe they just sent you that.
I genuinely think it was because they'd worked on a lot of different projects and contracts, and they had a lot of different things that they were including, and had been contracting on shortish term, and they literally listed every single thing as a separate job. Nobody is going to read 36 pages, and however good you are, the fact that when I open that document it's 36 pages, the first question that I then have is, okay, and what is this person's judgment like? Because if they're expecting me to read 36 pages, then immediately I question their judgment and decision making. And therefore, for a relatively senior role, that's always going to be crucial. I think it's also really useful, that point that you made about the more senior you are and the more senior roles, because I think, again, I've seen CVs for senior roles where you do want a bit more. And I've seen 2 pages where it's in font size 8. It's absolutely stuffed. And you just think, you could have just spaced this over 3. So if people are listening and scared of going on to a 3rd page, if you are at that kind of head of, director, senior management type role, or aspiring towards that for your next application, then definitely, if it's getting really rammed and you genuinely can't take stuff out because it needs to be there, much better for it to be formatted nicely over 3 pages than just for the sake of some random industry standard to go to 2. What else would you say are the common things that you have to help clients with then when it comes to their CVs and job search?
Another one on CVs is just generally being able to articulate their experience, because it's funny that when you kind of go networking, or when you kind of getting into conversation with people and you ask them about themselves and they can talk for hours, as soon as people get to their CV and interviews as well, and they're asked to talk about themselves, all of a sudden they lose the ability to be able to articulate what they do, how they do it. It's almost like, who am I? Have I been doing the last few years? So that is another key thing that I see, just being able to articulate that experience and what you've actually done day to day. And the easiest way to do that is to not sit in front of your computer screen and try to write the bullet points. It's to map it out on a piece of paper. You get the download from your head head. And it's like, what am I doing day to day, week to week, month to month? And really just allowing your mind to remind you what you've done and how it made you feel. And, because admin, I was proud to deliver and things like that. It really does make a difference, because when you read through things like that, it's like, you can almost feel a sense of pride sometimes when you're reading through people's things. And it's like, they're the type of people that you're like, yeah, I need someone like that on my team. Somebody who really takes pride in the work, somebody who is delivering things that makes them feel proud, not just because it's part of the job. So it's things like that where you can start adding in little snippets of personality and little bits about you. Just take that time to think about your experience, and you'll be able to articulate it so much better. And I think job search, generally, people just think, I have to do as many applications as can, send that CV off, just keep pinging it out there. And then they don't hear back, or they get rejected. They never really understand why. And they never really take a minute to think, okay, was that really tailored properly? Did I really tell them what I can bring to the table? Because I hear it so many times, but it was my dream job and it got rejected. And it's like, okay, well, you just need to take that little bit of time to think through, what do they want from me, and am I clearly demonstrating that on my CV? And that will get you more interviews than just pinging your CV off on the one click apply.
And what are your thoughts on some of the design elements? Because I think sometimes people either feel like they should have a CV that's got design, color, formatting, all that kind of stuff, and then sometimes people are like, no, it should be black and white and 2 pages and Times New Roman, font size 12. Where do you stand on all of that?
So I created a post on LinkedIn on this last week. So the graphically designed ones, when you're sending them in, if you're in like the graphic design space, if you are a web designer, if you are a design person, then, it's not unusual to see something quirky and something interesting. But when you aren't in an industry that, is creative or art based, and it kind of leaves you open to so much unconscious bias. So if I open up the CVs and I think, oh my goodness, and it's just because I don't like the design. And it's the same with pictures on the CV as well. And I'm looking at it thinking, why would you put them colors together? And what you don't want to do is, you don't want to leave your CV open for somebody to unconsciously criticize it, because as soon as they open it and they don't like that design, then already they're making a decision about you. So even if you've got the best information on there, sometimes, not all the time, obviously, that can be overlooked. So I usually recommend the traditional format, and you can use a pop of color. I usually recommend using something neutral, like a blue color, because that is neutral, and it does allow you to split out the sections, and it's seen as a corporate professional color, but it does give you that bit of color pop. But yeah, I've seen so many different types of CVs. I mean, what kinds of CVs have you, what is your view actually? Do you like those colorful ones?
I'm totally with you on this. And I'm smiling because I'm remembering a CV it was for a marketing role, and there was a lot of design. And again, exactly, I've totally recognized myself in what you're describing, of as soon as I looked at it, that was what it was, a distraction, because what I was doing was judging that design rather than looking at the elements of experience. That kind of almost overrode what I should have been doing first. And we did interview that candidate, and I think people do it sometimes because they want to show personality, and I get that. And there is the argument that says, well, if I do it and somebody doesn't like the design, then, it's not the role for me. And you can take that approach and that attitude. But again, you have to bear in mind that the person there's normally 2 or 3 people that are going to look at it before you get invited for interview. So you're going to have a recruiter, potentially a person on the recruitment team in-house, and a hiring manager. And all of those have got to be on your side when it comes to liking the design. Most hiring managers that I've worked with have not liked most of the heavily designed CVs that I've ever put in front of them. And it's been then almost an additional sell to get them to actually interview those candidates. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And I do think using some simple, like you say, color pop, something that kind of separates sections. There are ways that you can introduce something that makes your CV look slightly different to the totally boring black and white, without the design becoming the focus of the CV. So I think that's, for me, that's where the line is, of use it where you can use it to make it easier, make sections stand out. Don't use it to show off your kind of personality or your flair, unless that is an integral part. Like you say, if you're in the graphic design space, then all bets are off. But yeah. if it's a kind of a standard role, then typically those are not well received when they're heavily designed.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, because when I'm writing CVs, and this is what I always say to clients as well. So when you send in your CV, you want that person to be excited about interviewing you. So like what you're saying there, if you've got to then persuade someone because they didn't like the design to interview that person, they're not going to be excited in the interview. So you want them reading through your CV like, yes, that, like, get this person in. And, because they're excited to meet you, they want you to win. And this is what I think has massively increased my clients' success rates, because they're sending in that CV that excites, that gives that little bit of personality, that articulates that experience, that is formatted nicely so it does stand out. And then they've got that excitement. They want them to win. So then they're going into the interview. And if you go into an interview and that recruiter or employer wants you to win, then they're going to be hearing your answers so much differently to if they're like, well, I'm not sure, wasn't sure on the CV. Let's see what they've got. If you get them excited, you're more likely to get that job offer. If you can get them excited from the get-go, then it's going to make it so much quicker, easier, smoother to get that job offer.
So is there anything else then, before we wrap up, that you would say either mistakes people need to avoid, or things that they can do and put to action quite quickly and easily that will help their CV to stand out?
Okay, so I'd say straight away, the first thing you need to do is get your CV out and read it, because I guarantee it will have all kinds of spelling errors in, it'll have grammatical errors, it'll have formatting errors. Before you start adding in any information, just clear up all of those formatting errors. Save it as a PDF and view it as a PDF, because you should always send in your CV as a PDF anyway, so that things can't be moved around, and it doesn't matter what version of Word your CV is opened on, because everybody's got a different version of Word. Now, if you send it in as a PDF, it doesn't matter whether it's a phone, a laptop, a tablet, it will be viewed in the same way. So save it as a PDF and look at it and just see what it looks like. And you'll be able to see where you've got some formatting errors, where some bullets have further over than others. I think I've actually got OCD when it comes to format and CVs. It's like they've got to be perfect. All the bullets have got to be lined up. If you are using, sentences, then you need to make sure that your sentences are concise, that they are easy to read, that they actually mean something. So go through every single line you've got on your CV and ask yourself, does this mean something? Or is it just there because I feel like it needs to be there? It needs to add value. It needs to be another line that demonstrates what you can bring to the table. So if you can do that and then go through it line by line and check what you've got, your CV will be in a much better state. And then the next thing that you need to do is you need to start looking at the jobs that you're applying for or you'd like to apply for, and make sure that you are what is the purpose of this role, and have I clearly articulated the purpose in my CV? Does it match the purpose of this job role? And ask yourself for each different role, because when you're tailoring your CV, it's not just about putting a nice personal statement at the top. It's about going through each role and pulling out the key bits that are relevant. If you're applying for, say, for example, a project manager role, then if your last 3 roles have contained an element of project management, then that should be clear within each role. Because, if you're just going to tailor the last role or the current role to where you're moving to, I mean, if that's all the experience that you've got, then, that's fine. But if you can articulate it in different ways throughout your CV, then they can see the clear path of where you've been and how you got to here, and what you can potentially bring to their role. So I think if you can do that, then that is going to make you stand out. And then finally, take out any information that really isn't needed. Like, just be ruthless with yourself. Just, red pen it, get rid of anything that's not necessary, and you will have a version that I guarantee you'll be much happier with, and will significantly increase your chances of getting selected. What would you add to that, Jacqui?
So absolutely agree with that. I think one of the crucial bits, I would say, from being that kind of on the receiving end of CVs rather than helping people to write them, is that element of really think about how much depth for each role you want to give. Because when I've received them, people tend to do one of two things. They've either clearly just added their current role on the top of what they've done previously and shuffled everything down, and then there's as much depth or information about a job that they did 15 years ago as there is about their current role, or they've basically kind of condensed stuff from what they've done before, and then you've really got nothing other than dates and a job title so that they can emphasize what they've done recently. And the reality for most roles is that there will be elements of roles that you've done more recently. It won't just be that most recent role. There will be elements from previous roles. So don't feel like you have to have that same consistency of, everything up to this point is just job title and dates, and then from there needs to be more. Think about that specifics, like you were saying, of the experience that you had in each of those roles, and have as much as is relevant to the role that you're applying for. And I think people sometimes are nervous of doing that and feel like it'll look a bit weird. And I'm thinking back to when I was employed and mistakes that I know I made, that in the time since, I'm now kind of like, oh yeah, I used to do that.
Yeah, and I think as well, what you're saying there is perfect as well, because each job doesn't have to be formatted the same. So if you've got more experience to show in one job, but then in another job it was just a small part of your role, but it's relevant, then you can just write 2 or 3 sentences under that rather than just leave it as a title and a date. You don't necessarily need to do a summary and the bullet points. You can just literally put what's relevant. It doesn't have to be like identical and symmetrical and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's a good point as well.
Final question before we wrap up, and I'm ready. I'm going to light the blue touch paper and then ask this.
Oh God, what is this?
Gaps on CVs. Should people explain them?
Oh my goodness, this is my biggest bugbear. So my view on gaps on CVs is that it is literally no one's business why you've got a gap on your CV. And this is something that causes people it just derails job searches and stops people from moving on, and makes people stay in jobs that they hate, and makes people not go back to work after a period of having a break because they're so worried about, how do I explain this gap? So you are allowed to have a life outside of work. So you can put on a gap, you can explain a gap in your CV, but 9 times out of 10, you don't need to do that. So people will detail career breaks and write a full essay on bringing up children, and here are all the key skills I learned when bringing up my child. You don't need to go into that much detail because it's actually none of their business. And if it was quite a few years ago, you don't even need to put in career break. If they want to go through the dates and work out, did you have a break, and ask you about it, then that's on them. Your CV is your story. So if you want to put it on, you can, but obviously you just need to be prepared to talk about that in an interview. Providing your CV shows what you can deliver for a company, they won't be bothered about a gap. You might get asked about it, but people will interview you because they can see that you've got what they need for their role.
And I think there is a perception, and I do understand why, but there is a perception that people will be judged, and therefore they feel like if I explain it, maybe I'll counteract that judgment.
Yeah.
And particularly I see it if people, like you say, have had career breaks for bringing up family. Also, if people have failed a probation period, or if people have been on the receiving end of a settlement agreement, then often, and even redundancy, it's almost, sometimes I feel like people feel like redundancy is slightly different, because that almost that justifies more why I've had a break. So I'm a bit more comfortable to talk about that. Whereas if they've failed probation or had time out for kids, they feel like that's going to reflect on them and they're going to be judged for it. And what I would say to people in that situation is, do not feel that everybody is out there waiting to judge you. There's some amazing candidates out there who have had time out for whatever reason, whether it's family responsibilities. There are people who fail probation periods because companies realize that the role that they recruited for isn't really the role that they wanted. There are people who fail probation periods because they were recruited for a role and actually they didn't perform in that role. Doesn't mean they're not a great candidate for a different role. And I think sometimes when people take those knocks to their confidence that come from being out of the workforce for a period of time, then they can feel that they have to kind of justify or explain. And actually, yes, probably, you know, as a recruiter, I do ask that question sometimes of if there's a gap, you do want to understand, well, you know, what prompted it, what was happening. But more so, what I want to know is about you. I want to understand, are you going to bring what I need for my client's business into this role? Have you got the capacity to lead a team? Have you got the capacity to, you know, bring together, you know, to put processes and controls in place in a department or a function where that hasn't been happening? And if you have, and you can demonstrate that you have, then I don't give a monkeys if you failed a probation period 5 years ago. What I want is to see how you can demonstrate that you can bring what I need for this role. So I just wanted to kind of, I guess, include that, because I do see it where people let that dent their confidence, and then they're scared that they're going to be judged. And actually, then they end up, a lot of it is that they're judging themselves and they feel second best before they start. And that's never a good place if you want to make yourself stand out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's just about being prepared to speak about it and know what you want to say if you get asked that question, because it's the fear of being asked that question that absolutely will derail a job search or an interview or whatever, because people will be that, you know, hung up on how do I answer it. So you just need to be ready with your answer. And then as soon as you've got your answer nailed in your head, it's like, right, let's go. Let's get on with this job search.
Perfect. So if people want to work with you, Pam, on their CV, they kind of recognize themselves in some of that, yeah, I've been pinging off applications and not hearing anything back. How do they get in touch with you?
The main way, probably the easiest way, is find me on LinkedIn, where I am literally hanging out every day. Or you can just go straight over to my website, which is super simple, pamelalangan.com. And all of the information on CVs and job searches is on there as well. So yeah, that is me.
Perfect. And you have got a resource as well, a free resource for people who want to be able to write their own CV and make that stand out. So we're going to make that available in the show notes and on careerandleadershiprealtalk.com. And that is a download that will help you if you don't have the budget to invest in working privately, but want to make sure that your CV stands out. So that brings us to the end for today. As ever, we would love you to rate and review if you've enjoyed and had value from today's episode. Podcast is available on Spotify, on iTunes, and on all of the other main podcasting platforms. And we will be back with you with another episode next week. Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges. We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.